Hello and welcome to this episode of Veriff Voices. My name is Chris Hooper and I am Director of Creative and Content here at Veriff. In the fast-moving, ever-evolving world of digital businesses, it's vital for Veriff to meet all of our regulatory obligations to ensure safety and security for all of our customers and users, and that we are operating responsibly while fulfilling our mission to return trust to the online world. One of the people playing a key role in this is Aleksander Tsuiman. With nearly a decade of experience in law, Aleksander is our head of regulatory. And in this podcast, we cover a number of topics, including his key insights into regulatory developments in the IDV sector and what this means for businesses. So first of all, welcome, Aleksander. Thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it greatly.
Hi, Chris, and thank you for having me.
I guess the first question really is sort of how do you create a sort of and enforce this kind of accountability around any of the sort of the compliance works, the compliance regulations that we have to sort of adhere to?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think in the end, it kind of boils down to three elements. First is, the culture of the company. Second is kind of engagement. And actually the third is kind of, being in the right place, actually. To, start off from culture, it's kind of a top-down question, right? So it's a question what is actually kind of valued in the company, but it's also kind of very strong delivering the answer to the question, why? Why do we have to do certain things, right? And when the culture is there, when it's kind of emphasized that certain actions, have to be taken, not for the sake of, being compliant with the law or just kind of doing a checkbox exercise, but actually there's actually the why this regulation, for example, exists. That, for example, we kind of want to protect the privacy of our end users. Then it just kind of becomes much more, clearer. And, when the leadership is kind of, also living the same values, then it's kind of very easy for the company and the individual contributors to actually align to that culture. From an engagement point of view, yes, you can kind of, have this approach that, yes, we want to kind of embed compliance into our policy and procedures, but you have to actually build those processes and trainings and communication channels in a way that those are engaging and they are kind of most close to the actual ways of working of the organizations and to the teams that are most affected by it. Right? The approach that we take is that we are trying to be as close as possible, and we're trying to understand how do the teams, except the product and or engineering teams, are actually working, so that we can kind of embed the processes where they are most make sense, for example, for a software developer. And I think the question is, are you actually reachable? Are you open? So just kind of have to be approachable in that sense that that people have to have the opportunity and the right to ask questions, and you also question the frameworks that you have put in place for it. And lastly, the being in the right place. I don't use the kind of phrase being in the right place at the right time. I think it's just kind of being in the right place all of the time, and that very much means that there are certain for example, in a product development lifecycle, there are certain stages where you can have quite a strong compliance impact, for example. And it's just important the right people are embedded into those processes, that they are a natural part of that process, actually. So that actually, from an example point of view, is that we have, product attorneys or product counsels or product lawyers actually in my team, and they're actually engaged throughout the kind of regular, syncs with the product managers, regular revisions of, work, regular kind of planning cycles. They're actually embedded into that life cycle. So that is the way that we ensure that, in the most critical places, we are always there.
Yeah, I like that. What are some of the main regulatory challenges facing businesses around the issue of identity verification that you're seeing today?
Yeah, I think it's a big question, right? So it's a really big question. We can kind of, chop it into, I'll say three pieces. First, I would say it's kind of, the challenges are very kind of use case specific. Secondly, there are, we can call them kind of, purely regulatory challenges. And thirdly, we can separate kind of, technological challenges. So I'm gonna go into each of them separately. But I think firstly the use case challenges are very much related to the identity verification as such. So in its kind of different shapes and forms, I would say identity verification is definitely on the rise, and we're seeing actually kind of new use cases popping up. So, those use cases are mainly connected to new laws and regulations being introduced. And those laws and regulations actually require customers to know who is the person behind the screen. And there are kind of, different thresholds actually, which those companies need the assurance of someone's identity. So I think the kind of very classical, just kind of, do the identity verification of a document, that's probably, that's still there, but the kind of need for that, I think it's declining. Oftentimes because the new laws and regulations actually do require a kind of very limited set of number of personal data to be actually verified. So we don't, for example, want or need to verify the whole document. And for example, EU, there is a regulation, a law called EIDAS, and actually the EIDAS is being currently revised. So there is going to be being called EIDAS 2.0, which actually kind of changes how the European Union and the European Union member states view centralized digital identity, and also puts actually extra obligations on the EU member states to change the approach that they're currently taking with the digital identity. So that would be kind of very important for the EU market, and among others, it mostly requires the EU member states to launch actually a kind of a digital wallet solution, which actually also will hold quite a lot of personal data, but it will actually give users control over that data. And we can kind of take the UK, for example, as well, whereas the UK has actually put forward its trust services framework, and it is kind of more and more being actually integrated into the digital ecosystem of the UK. As we know, UK has, unfortunately, kind of, departed the European, family, so to say. So there is actually an opportunity for UK to kind of, build and bring about this kind of own digital solutions and, its own ecosystem. And there are actually kind of, changes happening around that as well. The second part of the challenge is, I would just, say that they are kind of purely regulatory challenges, and that's just for the sake of me simplifying it for myself, right? Is those actually concern not only the businesses that are involved in kind of identity verification or, online businesses. There are actually business, laws and regulations that concern all businesses. And the, prime example would be the privacy laws. There are existing privacy laws, but there are also kind of, changes to those existing privacy laws and the emergence of new privacy laws. A good example from a geographic perspective is, for example, the US. The US doesn't actually have a kind of a federal privacy law, but there's no kind of a centralized approach to privacy, but we're seeing actually new states regulating with a relatively high pace. So this will not only affect the identity verification sector or the businesses using identity verification, it actually affects all of the businesses. So thirdly, the technological challenges. Those should definitely not be ignored, and probably no one is really surprised when I'm saying that those actually concern the artificial intelligence and kind of machine learning technology. And yes, so this is where we see the regulation or the kind of the emerging regulation concerning those technologies is coming into play. We see more and more regulators and legislators actually addressing the challenges of widespread adoption of artificial intelligence. And I think the kind of best example, and maybe the best known example, is the European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act. Although the EU is definitely not alone in this space. In case we look at the kind of major economies, for example, the US and UK, all of those have actually said that they all understand that they have to take some kind of an approach. This is due to, I would say, firstly, trust issue in society, where I would say the people actually coming in contact with artificial intelligence solutions are there is a question of whether I can be sure whether I'm talking, for example, with a human, or is it a machine that I'm talking with? Is the content real, or is the content generated by an artificial intelligence solution?
I think you're right. Sort of dividing it up into those three sections is a really good way of kind of understanding this. And I thought, just while you were talking about that last one, actually around AI, we've got a lot of content coming up around this because it's such a hot topic at the moment, and it's obviously a huge part of our business. It did make me think while you were talking around that kind of almost game of cat and mouse that is played between sort of regulators and tech innovators, if you like, in that the tech is moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and sort of legal legislation can be quite slow to catch up. I know that the Veriff has played quite a sort of kind of fundamental role, I think, in sort of providing some of the information for that legislation that has been over the last sort of couple of years. Actually, are you able to talk at all about that, just briefly, just to sort of just to let the listeners know kind of the role that we're playing in sort of helping regulation keep up with the pace of tech?
Yeah, to reflect, first that it's very hard for legislation or law be ahead of the time, and I think that's kind of a going into a theory of law maybe, but law should kind of regulate or should reflect something that is already in the society or is kind of emerging, right? Because in case you're going to regulate front, then you don't really see what are the actual kind of effects down the line, right? So to go into the AI Act, yes, Veriff has been involved in the kind of the policy level activities regarding the AI Act. We have submitted feedback. We have been involved in the kind of stakeholder conversations and actually engaging with digital trade associations, who are actually also kind of key players in the European Union. So firstly, I think that there is a general understanding that we should regulate something, and there is just a question, what is risky enough to be regulated, actually. And I think here is definitely that the industry is looking towards, regulate very kind of precisely the things that are very kind of high risk and that actually pose risk for the society as a whole. For example, are visiting a doctor, or I don't know, in the worst case, we're having surgery, right? And when there is some kind of an artificial intelligence, solution embedded somewhere in the kind of medical process, then probably you and me would like, that to be kind of very quality checked and, be kind of up to certain standards, right? And I think there are, key places in the society where we want the technology and also, existing technology to function on a very kind of high level. So that being said, I think this is the place where, most of the industry players and society kind of agrees that, yes, we should regulate, for example. And then, when we kind of move, so to say, lower from those use cases, then the picture gets more kind of, hazy, right? Because you want to, we believe, of course, that, the existing laws should be upheld. For example, we in the European Union, we have a very strong privacy framework. The GDPR is probably not news to anyone. Actually, the GDPR actually had its kind of 5-year birthday, just a short while ago. So I think that it is kind of a question, how much should we kind of rely on existing laws while putting forward kind of new obligations. And I think all the industry players are understanding that in case those obligations are reasonable and they address the actual kind of risks or the points where risk actually emerges, then that regulation is actually very much acceptable and very much kind of fine. But I think that the European Union is taking somewhat of a risk, being the first one to actually regulate at least from the big economies. And I think that's can be the situation where for example, the UK, and the US are actually adopting kind of a more wait and see approach, where they have said that, existing regulators are very much equipped and actually allowed to enforce existing laws, but we're not gonna put in place a kind of comprehensive or overarching artificial intelligence, law right now, And although they might not, say it out loud, I think it's very much kind of, let's wait and see what the European Union is doing or how is it going, and then we can adopt and we can regulate. Yeah, to just maybe add that I think that the future of the identity verification industry is definitely, more and more automation, from a viewpoint that in case there's more automation, then technology is also, cheaper, and it's actually kind of more widespreadly adoptable. So I think that it doesn't mean that the humans shouldn't be in the loop for kind of critical decisions, for example, and to review decisions when there is a kind of a level of doubt that something is going wrong. But I think we want to, in a certain sense, democratize technology in a sense that we can provide the kind of, services and the technology for actually kind of, increasing the trust online.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think it's, one of our missions obviously is to try and, rebuild this feeling of trust online. And I think we're doing that in a number of ways through our technology, through contributing to these sort of, these legal frameworks which are developing and everything else. I think it's really encouraging to me that Veriff is taking a proactive role in that and kind of leading the way to a certain extent when it comes to those kind of things. Back to what we were talking about earlier, actually, around sort of this sort of ever evolving and constantly changing sort of external picture, especially when you factor in the different jurisdictions that you're working in. Obviously, the EU, UK is one thing, but the US and the various state legislations that are there is another thing altogether. How do you, as a sort of team or as a company, how does Veriff kind of, how do we stay on top of those sort of potential regulatory challenges, and just sort of how do we prepare and know that they're coming, and what's the sort of the process there?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a question, what, where, and when is changing actually, right? So, firstly, we do have a kind of tight network of outside counsels. It's just that, you just cannot be an expert on every field of law in every jurisdiction around the world, right? So you have to have, cooperation partners, and we have that in the key jurisdictions. Secondly, we also have the kind of in-house, regulatory monitoring, routines. We have researchers and analysts employed, and we kind of have the kind of processes and systems around that where they go through certain updates using certain systems. They kind of make the the first line analysis, and then they bring it back to the team. And in the end, it's kind of the team, right? So when you have this information, the team we have, I think, is very kind of reliable, and you need to apply the right kind of out-of-the-box thinking in certain cases, but you just have to have a certain routine that just works, right? Because you can have a lot of information, but in case you don't do anything with the information, then it's essentially useless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a real sort of differentiator for us actually as a company. Obviously, we help our customers remain compliant. So it's important that we are compliant ourselves, obviously, and held to the highest possible standards. But we have to sort of provide that for others as well. So kind of aware of regulatory changes in different industries and that kind of thing as well. I think it's amazing actually the level of understanding and work that your team does. It really is remarkable. What kind of advice would you give to other sort of companies operating in this digital world about how to kind of manage their regulatory obligations, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a good and a hard question at the same time. I think the general kind of approach is the, I would say, the kind of a three horizon model is that you actually, firstly, for example, when you're a very kind of early stage company, and actually it doesn't matter, you can be in a stage, but in case you kind of enter a certain market, for example, then you firstly you have to figure out what you have to do to defend your core business or actually build your core business. And this means that you have to understand what are your current key regulatory concerns, needs, and where do they arise. From a kind of a process perspective, it just means that you need to understand where those laws and regulations can actually have a great impact, on the company and to the organization in the work that you're doing in the organization. And you kind of have to, embed yourselves into the key places or the kind of key lifelines. So actually nothing, falls through the cracks when, those kind of risky processes, for example, are being kind of conducted inside the company. that's kind of very much focusing actually what is currently at hand. So the second kind of line is that you have to focus on actually kind of nurturing emerging business and kind of understanding what will happen in the future, but that's going to happen at some point in time. To put it simply, is to just have an understanding of your future and certain kind of key regulatory concerns. When do they arise? Where do they arise? Because oftentimes the law is adopted, but there, for example, is a period before it's actually applied, right? So just kind of understanding, what are the key laws, what are their timelines, and thirdly, it's focusing on what is not very clear, but or quite likely to know that this will happen at some point in the future, and that actually means staying up to date with the policy developments. It's staying up to date with national strategies, white papers, and just understanding the pain points of the industry, society, and the policymakers, because that actually defines the direction that the future laws will take. The timeline might not be very clear, but it's clear that in case it's a pressing concern, that at some point something will actually happen. We can kind of summarize it around a kind of a statement that yes, laws are obligations, but they're also opportunities. Especially in case you're operating in a more compliance-driven field, is yes, they put forward obligations, but they actually give the opportunity to actually produce, real value for the business. Or for our case, in case our clients are actually being introduced with a new regulation, then it's always that, we try to help our customers to stay compliant. Or when they need us to be compliant, and, we could say, yes, we understand you, this is on our roadmap, this will happen, and we, are better partners and we are better informed. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, because I think quite often there is this sort of negative perception around the compliance thing, as in kind of it stops us from doing things and it becomes, something that we have to adhere to. But I think that there's a really positive way of looking at it as well. And we've certainly had this with conversation with our customers, actually, where, a sort of a high level of robustness and around your compliance processes is something that will give peace of mind to your customers, especially in sort of things like financial services as an example, where where customers are looking for that. They would rather have that sort of a slightly slower user experience, or a slightly more go through a couple of extra stages in the onboarding process if it means that their sort of transactions are going to be secure and sort of just a better service in the long run. So I think that there is absolutely like I don't know what you'd call it, really, a commercial advantage, I suppose, to being highly compliant. It really is. And I think it's a selling point in and of itself, certainly within, as I said, some of those industries like financial services, but in others as well. One thing I'd like to talk about, if you don't mind, is kind of how your team, I guess, kind of collaborates with other teams within the business. You kind of alluded to how you work quite closely with the product development team earlier on, but is there just a way that you guys sort of will approach how you work with other departments to ensure compliance?
Yeah, the stakeholder circle is actually very wide. And I think the first, question is, know your stakeholders, right? With key stakeholders, we have regular syncs in place. We aim to actually kind of stay continuously on the loop. Actually, what are they doing? What are we doing? And in Veriff, we're very much kind of focused on kind of doing, for example, quarterly plans. So that is obviously kind of a key, time to actually, to have those syncs, to have those talks. So we have those on a kind of leadership level, but we also have those on a kind of individual contributor level, meaning that actually kind of each team member is responsible regarding their kind of part of that work. And it's also their job to kind of, bring back that information to the team so we can kind of understand, okay, what is the whole picture actually. Also, there are some cross-company projects, and those are kind of being run in a more centralized manner actually. And, there can be kind of a project manager, there can be kind of unified lines of communication, periodic syncs, periodic meetings, so that you stay up to date, you understand, what each part of the company is actually doing. So I think it's when you have kind of continuous ways to share information, that just reduces the likelihood that, you don't know certain things, right? And obviously when the company is growing, there can be just a surge of information, right? And just being kind of in touch with the people who know that you are your stakeholders, then they're very likely to, inform you of something that also happens with their stakeholders, right? Because the stakeholder, circle might not actually be the same. So you actually kind of, feed information through the stakeholder circles And I think it's very much of kind of communication, question than, a kind of a project management, automation, or a software tooling question or something like that. Right? So you just have to stay in touch with the people, actually.
Well, speaking as one of your stakeholders, I think that I can say that your team does this very well, and I think creating those the sort of putting the structures in place that allow for those feedback loops, because as you said, there's so much that your team needs to be abreast of in terms of regulatory changes around the world and what the industry is, what each industry is saying, if you like, kind of the chatter within there. You kind of hear that from our revenue teams, our sales teams, who are having day-to-day conversations with these big customers who are in these spaces, and the information we're getting kind of filters back to us and hopefully back to you guys, and then we can sort of build policies around it and our own sort of programs, as it were, as well. So yeah, I think that the communication is definitely the key to all of that. And I'd just like to sort of switch tracks ever so slightly, I guess, but just talk about you more as an individual now. I'd like to know what your kind of main sort of couple of key learnings are that you could take away from your role here as sort of head of regulatory.
Yeah, I could put it in kind of a really short sentence. I think it's first, I think, the working in an international company, it just gives you the understanding that, the world is a very diverse place. Very, of course, there are different laws and regulations, but, there are also kind of, different people, different cultures. That's a key point in a sense, because the way that the society is built also actually has a very strong effect on the laws and regulations. So, the connection might not be very direct, but it's still there. And I think the second key learning is just to kind of know your business and know the space where the business is operating. And the better you know the business, and the more you know the details around it, and it can be actually, down to very kind of technical details. For example, I don't know how a certain kind of check in the identity verification flow is actually kind of working, which teams are actually involved. This actually gives you a more kind of in-depth and more diverse picture, and it gives you more context. So for us, it's always, you look kind of outside of what is happening in the kind of outside world, but you cannot make sense of it for the company. So I kind of very much encourage, to actually be engaged in regular kind of shadowing sessions with actually teams that, you don't really work with on a daily basis, but it actually gives you a better understanding what's the business actually all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting too, because there's quite often a perception, I guess, of legal in general, but the regulatory piece being almost like a bit of a back office function. But in some respects, you're doing having a lot of conversations with customers. As I said, there's a selling point to all of this in a sense too, in that it's a real business driver, I think, and a real sort of potential revenue driver for our customers. What would you say has been kind of the biggest success of your team, if you had to sort of, if there is a way of sort of crystallizing that at all? And I think, I guess what I would like to get to as well is maybe your approach to sort of leadership and how you lead them as well. But I think that maybe let's talk about the successes first and get to that in a moment.
Yeah, it's a hard question. Hard from the sense that it was a case where we just recently had to do kind of a retro or a kind of look back June 2023 to June 2022, right? Then I had to somewhat kind of summarize certain kind of key projects. We use Jira in-house. I kind of, opened the Jira board. I just kind of, I had my ideas, but I wanted to kind of have a more objective look, right? And I think it all comes down to whatever project there has been, it's kind of a team success. There are, of course, kind of key individual contributors, but everything we have done, I think it's kind of a team win in the end. Two kind of key categories came out. One is that we have implemented quite a lot of important changes for the company to, keep compliance in mind, to enable the company actually to scale and act as a reliable part to the biggest companies in the world, who are various clients actually. So I think that's a very important achievement, in a sense that we don't stay put, but we try to kind of move together with industry and with the clients. And I think secondly, we have worked more and more towards I'd say, enhance transparency from point of view that we create more online resources. We put more information online that would actually be there for our end users, but also for our clients. So we are actually kind of more transparent with what we do, how we do it. What are, for example, our security commitments? How does our privacy notice look like? And we just kind of create more of those resources for us to be less of a kind of a black box and actually kind of facing our clients, facing the end users.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we covered before, I think that is, that's the role of a legal team within a sort of a tech company. I think is as I say, not that to be that sort of almost invisible back office kind of function, is to be really at the front of things, driving things forward, and being a value add. I think it's a huge value add for our customers. Actually, I think we hear this all the time in conversations that I have with them. I do lots of sort of case study calls and testimonials and things like that. And one of the things that often comes up is how great Veriff's people are and how helpful they are and everything else. And all of this is kind of a free service, effectively, that is sort of wrapped in. There's no additional cost for this expertise. It's a really great offer that we have as in this respect, I think. So just to wrap up quickly, then, just as to talk about leadership, I know you're quite keen to sort of spread the credit that your team gets amongst them all. But I think there must be it does take a bit of leadership to run it all. What is it? Is there any particular sort of processes or tips you've got there to sort of get the best out of these individuals, I suppose?
Yeah, it's true. I have to kind of balance the individual effort with the leadership role. And I think it's very much firstly kind of acknowledging that you are not you're not the expert at everything, right? So actually, have members in the team for a reason. And when you hire great experts, it's actually kind of giving them the opportunity, responsibility, but to kind of grow and also to execute. So I think we're very much centered around individual freedom and individual execution, and it's you just have to kind of avoid the micromanaging. This will actually, when you have very talented individuals employed, and I think all of my team members are very talented, is that you don't want to kind of bring them down. You actually kind of want to take yourself out from the places where you don't actually add value. But then it's that you have to be there for the team. So you cannot just kind of stand and not be there. So you have to kind of keep the open lines of communication, and you have to build that kind of trustful relationship. And I think it's from an individual contributor perspective, it's definitely do we have interesting work? That's of course like a key question. And I think in a growing tech company, we do have very interesting work and we do have very interesting challenges. But on the other hand, do we have great people to actually, handle those challenges? And I think that's very much of a kind of building also the team-wide, building the environment that, you can be open and you're giving the opportunity to actually, do your best work. And I think that's kind of finding the balance. And, yes, of course, it's nice and kind of abstract way of saying it, everything is perfect, but, there are often, those kind of teeny tiny challenges that can, when not, solved correctly, and have a very negative effect. But of course, we try to stay as together as possible, and to just kind of face those challenges together.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said earlier on, sort of speaking as one of your stakeholders, I've seen your team in action, and you do. Yeah, they all do an incredible job. It really is. We kind of covered the breadth of it earlier on in terms of the scope of what you need to sort of stay on top of, and just to do so is absolutely remarkable. So credit to you, and thank you for joining us. This has been an amazingly interesting episode, actually, and a very, very sort of insightful conversation. I suspect that we're going to have to come back to you at some point in the near future to talk a little bit in more depth about AI and its impact and that kind of thing. But for now, we can say thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
No problem.